Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvelous video. Guardians of the Galaxy movies and comics have always offered a glimpse into Marvel's wacky side, where the creators combine the tragic backstories of the protagonists with goofy humor and action-packed story arcs. One of the most loved members of the team, Rocket Raccoon, is not an exception, and this humanoid, trash-talking raccoon with an attitude has been the heart of the franchise. The recent MCU release sheds some more light on his heartbreaking backstory, and in this video, we'll revisit his fascinating physiological details that make him such a badass. Beware of a few spoilers along the way. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I live for the simple things, like how much this is gonna hurt.
What did the High Evolutionary do to a raccoon to create this genius humanoid? Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 explores how a baby raccoon was used as a test subject for the High Evolutionary. He was seeking to create a perfect counterworld that would be populated by peaceful, anthropomorphic animals, and the raccoon was one of his several test subjects. He wanted to develop a perfect version of all these species, and as a delusional evil mastermind, he put these innocent animals through rigorous surgical and genetic modification procedures. Tampering with his brain and his physical form, the High Evolutionary ended up with Rocket Raccoon, who was transformed from a simple creature to a humanoid raccoon with the ability to speak and think. Was Rocket created by robots? The comic book origin story gets darker. The MCU version of Rocket's origin story might have taken a grim turn in the recent release, and while there's no denying how tragic Rocket's upbringing has been in the cinematic universe, the comic book version is just as dark. Here, he's created as a result of some illegal experiments run by robots who were tasked with taking care of insane asylum patients. The robots conducted various painful surgeries and genetic modifications to turn a regular raccoon into a talking humanoid variant. These robots were assigned the duties on a planet named Half-World, where all the crazies were sent for rehabilitation, and the robots got tired of their duties. They were no longer willing to care for the constantly growing population of insane people, and this led them to experiments where they came up with specimens like Rocket Raccoon. One of the major physical adjustments that they made came from painful surgeries that fitted a cybernetic skeleton inside Rocket. This enabled him to stand up straight, which would be a necessity to be a capable caregiver. Of course, this took a severe toll on his body and his mind, and the trauma of an innocent animal being put through such torture can hardly be put into words. How did Rocket turn out to be so smart? He might still be a raccoon deep within, but his intelligence is definitely at par with the smartest of humans. In fact, there are times when he's proven himself to be the most intelligent member of the team, and there's a reason behind his miraculous intellect. In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's been shown that Rocket was operated upon by the High Evolutionary and his team. The gnarly scar on his head is a clear indicator that he manipulated his brain structure, and this led to certain developments, such as his ability to speak and think rationally. This story arc is somewhat in line with the comic books, only in the comics the robots were behind the pathetic experiments. They genetically augmented his cerebral cortex, and this enabled him to be smarter than most other species in the universe. The High Evolutionary seems to have done something similar in the movie, and the humanoid raccoon was then trained to perform certain complex tasks. It's been stated that Rocket was far more intelligent than all the other creatures that the High Evolutionary was working on, and this prompted him to personally train and teach his creation. However, the initial bonhomie quickly disappeared when Rocket started to excel beyond his expectations, and the High Evolutionary never intended for the humanoid raccoon to be a part of his perfect world. Rocket was actually smart enough to solve the problem that the High Evolutionary was encountering with his Evolution Accelerator device. Instead of being happy about it, the psychotic High Evolutionary wanted to study his brain and dispose of his physical body. Fortunately for Rocket, his intelligence actually helped him escape the life that was determined for him both in the comic books and in the movies. How tall is Rocket in the Marvel Universe? Even though Rocket is ultimately a modified raccoon, he's considerably bigger than one in the comics and movies. However, his true size varies, and in the MCU he stands at 3 feet 1 inch. And his comic book version stands at 4 feet tall. He's taller than most of his friends and enemies, but that's never been a deterrent for Rocket. Why does Rocket carry so many scars? We've already spoken about the multiple surgeries and the toll that they took on Rocket's physical form. Whether you go by his comic book origins or the cinematic one, the multiple procedures and experiments conducted on his body were not just painful, but left an indelible mark on his body. The cinematic appearance of Rocket stays true to these origins, and we see him with some permanent scars on his body. It also adds to the battle-scarred veteran appearance, which goes well with the badass Raccoon. Does he still have Raccoon-like characteristics? In the MCU, you've often heard Rocket despising the fact that he's a raccoon. He keeps dissociating himself from his original identity, and considering the changes that he underwent, it's not totally unfair on his part to claim otherwise. However, it needs to be highlighted that Rocket still possesses many of his animalistic characteristics, just in an enhanced version. His strong sense of smell and other sensory receptors have typical raccoon-like traits, and even his eyesight is no laughing matter. The animalistic ability that helps him the most would have to be his electric reflexes, where he moves fast as a lightning strike. This enhances his combat style, and Rocket proves to be a lethal force armed with his iconic gun. For the Guardians of the Galaxy, his powers are definitely a handful, but they benefit the most from his incredible mind and spaceship piloting skills, which brings us to our next point. Did the modifications leave his sharp claws and teeth intact? The goal of the genetic augmentation wasn't to get rid of all of his raccoon-like features, and the primary changes were focused on his brain. His sharp claws were kept, maybe as a defense mechanism, but the High Evolutionary found out the hard way that he could have done things differently. In the recent release, Rocket is furious after his friends are killed in front of his eyes by the High Evolutionary. In a moment of berserk rage, he pounces on the man and slashes his face so bad that he required an artificial cover for the rest of his life to hide his deformities. Clearly, his claws were still just as sharp as you expect a raccoon to have, and it surely adds to his prowess in combat. How does something so tiny become so strong? Rocket Raccoon proves that appearances can be deceptive because the tiny humanoid raccoon packs quite a punch, unlike what one might think looking at him. Rocket got enhanced physical strength during the physical and genetic modifications conducted on his body, and his powers can be seen when he wields heavy weapons that would be impossible for someone his size to hold up. He was also made extremely durable, which enables him to withstand the deadliest of attacks and bounce right back up. In fact, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, he ends up being hit by a fatal blow, and any other individual would have succumbed in those conditions. The hardy Rocket managed to stay alive just in time for his wonderful friends to plan a recovery. Besides his brute physical strength, which is several times that of an animal his size, Rocket has also proven himself to be an expert marksman, and he has a fascination for advanced weaponry. He also has an unhealthy craving for bioengineered arms and limbs, which is probably because of his past life. Overall, he might be tiny, but the master strategist is strong enough to take down enemies who appear to be way more powerful. How did Rocket become such a skilled pilot? He didn't get his name for nothing. The humanoid raccoon is a mean pilot, and he's been shown maneuvering his spaceship through some extreme conditions. It might come as a shocker that in the MCU, nobody ever taught him how to fly one. As we can see from the events of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Rocket managed to break free before the High Evolutionary could execute him, and he got himself on a spacecraft in order to escape. Even with no previous training, he was able to fly away safely, even as the High Evolutionary's minions kept shooting at him. His skills, however, might be linked to the modifications conducted on his brain. It's been shown that he could think and come up with ideas even with no prior education on the matter, and he was always fascinated with rockets. In fact, his favorite thing to do during his gruesome training and experimental period was to imagine himself flying across the universe along with his friends. With a basic knowledge of rockets and spaceships, the incredible furball could fly one effortlessly, and over the years he became a master of his craft. Not only can he fly the familiar spacecrafts, he even familiarizes himself to an unknown craft in quick time. If it's an aerial combat or there is a need to get away quickly, you can count on Rocket for getting you out of trouble. Rocket the Raccoon, who suffers from OCD. It turns out that Rocket didn't just get a humanoid modification and intelligence, but also inherited some of the more complicated psychological issues that bother humans. The cinematic version in particular has often hinted toward a lingering OCD, which makes it difficult for him to function without everything in perfect order. For a creature of chaos and crime, which was much of early life, having OCD was quite ironical, but the creators decided to go with it nevertheless. Rocket also chooses to suppress his horrifying past life and never discusses it, even with his closest friends. He seems to be very protective about exposing and realizing his trauma, and it's only in the recent movie that we get to know the details about the brutality that he experienced. A raccoon with deep-rooted psychological disorders. Why not in the bizarre world of Marvel? Does Rocket have romantic inclinations? Can he reproduce? The recent release doesn't delve too much into his romantic life, but there have been a few glimpses to suggest a budding relationship with a fellow modified animal named Lila, an otter. She was another test subject for the High Evolutionary, and unfortunately, she couldn't make it through the final escape plan. The comic book story arcs, however, are a lot more specific in this regard, although Lila has a very different fate there. This sapient otter becomes Rocket's soulmate in the comics, and the two set out to live a life on their own terms. Can a humanoid raccoon and a modified otter have a biologically viable relationship? Well, there's no way to tell, but Rocket's reproductive abilities might be different from what you think. Let's introduce you to Raccoon, who was created from the genetic material of Rocket. The Collector, who happens to be one of the oldest living beings in the universe, created Rocket and used the genetic materials when Rocket was his prisoner. Technically, you can't say that Rocket is Rocket's biological child, but that's the most information that we have about his potential offspring. Maybe we have to wait for a few more movies and comic books to find the final answer to this question, but the charismatic humanoid raccoon surely has some romantic inclinations. Does Rocket have the lifespan of a raccoon? How old is he? The actual age of Rocket Raccoon is one of the great mysteries of the Marvel Universe, and neither the movies nor the comic books are specific in this regard. The average lifespan of a wild raccoon is only 2 to 3 years, and in captivity they can survive up to 20 years. But clearly, Rocket can't be classified as just another raccoon around the block. His genetic modifications and physical adjustments must have altered his lifespan as well, but there's no telling how old he is. There have been speculations among the fans that Rocket has been aging rapidly ever since the infamous snap, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 probably brings you the most vulnerable version of the raccoon for a majority of the movie. He's on the verge of death, and only a miraculous adventure and determination of his friends managed to save his life. He's certainly not immortal, or even close, but we certainly hope for a long life of this furry badass, because without him, the Guardians of the Galaxy would be terribly handicapped. Why is there a kill switch attached to his heart in the movie? In the recent release, after Rocket is fatally injured, the Guardians find out that the med pack wouldn't work on him, and this is because the High Evolutionary had installed a kill switch in his heart. This was probably done to prevent anyone to tamper with his creation, and we've witnessed how paranoid the High Evolutionary was about his innovations. If someone tried to forcibly fix the kill switch, it'd mean an instant death for Rocket, and this meant that the Guardians would need to access the code to turn off the kill switch in order to heal the injured raccoon. However, in the climactic moments of the movie, even the code doesn't seem to work, and it takes a dramatic sequence with a grieving Quill to fix the problem. A few desperate chest compressions revive him, and the code then starts to work, and Rocket is finally healed.
Right, Groot? Good. Don't drink fountain water.
How did Rocket Raccoon understand Groot from the very beginning? Groot is another enigmatic member of the Guardians, but his speech is only limited to, "I am Groot," which makes it difficult for others to understand him. While the recent movie shows that all members of the team are able to decipher his words, it was Rocket Raccoon who could understand him from the very beginning. It's been revealed that the translator machines used by the Guardians are ineffective to understand Groot's words, and as James Gunn stated, one needs to have a deep connection with Groot in order to understand him. Rocket was sympathetic because of Groot's painful origins, and maybe he connected with the humanoid tree more than others because of his own broken past. Others took some time to understand him, but for Rocket, it was instant. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 explores Rocket's origin story like never before, and we get the true depth of the character who masks his painful past with his humor and attitude. Do let us know in the comments below about your favorite anatomical feature in Rocket Raccoon, and also tell us what you think of his story arc going ahead in the MCU.